King of the Hill was one of the most hilariously relevant, timely, and relatable cartoons ever made, specifically when it comes to all the cultural battles that Hank finds himself fighting. King of the Hill's writing effortlessly ridiculed so many crazy cultural trends, movements, and issues in a way that wasn't polarizing or preachy. And what made the show so brilliant was juxtaposing all the cultural craziness with Hank Hill's awkward and uptight personality. I'm Kyle with Wicked Binge, and today we're counting down 20 culture wars that Hank Hill fought that are still hilariously relevant. But first, please remember to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you get notifications whenever we upload, I tell you what.
I laugh at Tony Danza.
Number 20, Hank versus the Garage Band. In the Season 2 episode, The Man Who Shot Kane Skredeberg, Hank and the neighborhood get annoyed by the loud teenage garage band, voiced by Green Day, nearby.
Now, it's not that I don't like music, it's just that I don't like music.
When they eventually bully Bobby and Joseph on the paintball field, Hank decides to challenge them to a 4v4 game to teach them some respect. Hank's disgust over the younger generation's disrespect is particularly funny given the hard time he and his friends give Pops, the old man that lives in the neighborhood.
What the hell's wrong with using a rake?
A rake, you say? I never heard of a rake, have you, Bill?
Which kind of showcases the constant disconnect between the older and younger generations. After losing their first battle, Hank, Dale, Bill, and Boomhauer raised the stakes and ultimately beat and deprived them of their guitar amp.
I think you're gonna enjoy the world of acoustics.
This was an earlier episode that focused on a pretty common but always relevant conflict between adults and teenagers, a theme that remained very prevalent throughout the show.
And there's duties in there, right?
There sure is, Pops.
Number 19, Hank versus the Gym Bros. When Bill meets a bodybuilder named Dirk,
they're jealous of my pump.
To help him train for his army physical, it doesn't take long until he overdoes it and alienates himself from his friends.
I'll tell you what, why don't you Smurfs start your own gym across the way?
Eventually, it's up to Hank, as usual, to come up with a plan to save Bill from his new meathead friends. Overall, this episode does a great job mocking the over-the-top gym bro who everyone who's ever stepped foot inside of a gym has met at some point.
We'll leave the thrash metal on for motivation.
Also, Dirk's voiced by the guy who plays the Rex Kwon Do character from Napoleon Dynamite, which is hilarious.
Bow to your sensei. Bow to your sensei!
And this one is Macho Man Randy Savage.
See, your elbows aren't tight, so you're missing out on the sick rip.
Number 18, Hank versus the Workplace Junkie. When Hank is asked to hire a new member at Strickland Propane, he ignorantly decides to hire a charismatic man over a more qualified woman. When it turns out that his new hire has a serious drug problem, it quickly becomes evident that he needs to be fired. But when a group leader shows up, it's revealed that it's actually illegal to fire someone for a drug addiction, no matter how horrible their behavior is.
Legally, drug addiction is a disability. And now that Leon's in rehab, the law prohibits you from firing him.
This episode critiqued the idea that drug addiction is an illness that absolves people from personal responsibility, which is obviously an idea that responsible Hank Hill would never co-sign on.
I get sick to my stomach unless everyone around me is given 110%. The symptoms include pride, responsibility, and a feverish enthusiasm. It used to be a common condition among Americans.
Number 17, Hank versus social media. When the episode Lost in MySpace came out in 2009, social media was still relatively new, but Hank Hill's suspicions of MySpace seemed to be the warning that we all disregarded about social media usage. When Donna takes over the Strickland MySpace page, she begins posting things that harm the Strickland reputation.
Woo! Dance with me! Come on, I'm so drunk!
Like any other form of technology, Hank rallies against it and convinces everyone that good, honest customer relations are what's important, as opposed to superficial social media postings. I think as a whole, we greatly underestimated the importance of the message when this episode came out. Number 16, Hank versus sexual harassment. In the episode John Vitti presents Return to La Grunta, Luann gets a job at a resort as a drink server and decides to get Hank a gift. That gift happens to be a ticket to go swimming with a dolphin, where he gets molested by the dolphin. Did I mention the writing is fantastic on this show? Totally embarrassed, Hank decides to keep things a secret and even agrees to keep his mouth shut when the resort offers to buy his silence. But when Luann is harassed at her job and he sees that she feels uncomfortable as well, he decides to throw her harasser in the pool with the dolphin that molested him.
You think you can touch anyone you want, anywhere you want?
Showing her that she has no reason to feel ashamed. This is probably one of the best commentaries on the subject of harassment, given that it relays the message properly, but still does it in a hilarious way that doesn't embrace the crazy level of political correctness you would expect from any show tackling this issue today. Number 15, Hank versus anger management. When Hank accidentally cuts Dale's finger off with his skill saw, well, it actually seemed more like Dale's fault, he's court-ordered to attend anger management classes. Of course, Hank doesn't get along too well with the instructor.
Why don't you pet an imaginary cat? Just like this.
But he also befriends another man with anger problems.
Don't you eyeball a junkyard dog! Now you got the dog barking!
But when his new friend dies from an anger-induced heart attack, Hank starts reevaluating his own anger problems. But it wouldn't fit the theme of the show to end it like that. The episode ends with Hank acknowledging that his anger actually has value, and his rage ultimately saves his friends from being crushed alive. Considering the ongoing theme in this show is that Hank's common sense is valuable in this crazy world, it makes sense that oftentimes his anger is more than justified. Number 14, Hank versus workplace harassment. When Strickland hires a new employee, voiced by Ben Stiller,
I need an 8-inch L-pipe.
That's what she said.
Hank becomes appalled by his sense of humor.
It's not funny.
With constant dirty jokes and sporadic games of grab-ass, Hank battles to maintain professionalism.
Listen to the new nickname that Rich thought up for Enrique.
You mean Enrique?
He even goes as far as to bring his complaint to a lawyer. And as funny as dirty jokes are, they're even funnier when juxtaposed with Hank's no-nonsense, uptight behavior.
You've got a potty mouth, and I'm gonna wash it out with soap.
And at the end of the day, Hank is right as usual because professionalism is always important in the workplace. Number 13, Hank versus the skateboard pastor. The episode Reborn to be Wild is a great example of a King of the Hill episode that has an age-old message. That oftentimes, the things that you think will never go out of style actually will. So when Bobby joins a church group that intertwines faith with all the trendy stuff he's into, music, rock and roll, and skateboarding,
Praise him! Praise him!
Hank starts to worry that his faith will ultimately become just another trend.
What's more important, that Bobby's a Christian or that he has a proper haircut?
I'm not giving up on either.
And although the pastor is a well-meaning guy, Hank makes a great point.
Can't you see you're not making Christianity better, you're just making rock and roll worse?
This is a great episode because it picks apart not only the crazy pastor that Bobby follows, but also Hank's own uptight and traditional views.
I know you think that stuff you're doing now is cool, but in a few years you're gonna think it's lame.
But his message at the end about trends coming and going is one that will always be relevant. Number 12, Hank versus his bully. In Season 10, Hank finds himself the victim of a local neighborhood bully named Caleb. The 10-year-old boy constantly harasses Hank, calls him names, and even rides his bike on his lawn.
Dusty old bones full of green dust. Dusty old bones full of green dust.
But Caleb's parents are not responsive to Hank's complaints. Embracing new age parenting techniques, they allow their son to get away with any poor behavior he wants. Finally, Hank decides to unleash Bobby on the parents, telling him to behave in a similar way to give them a taste of their own son's medicine.
A tisket, a tasket, there goes your basket.
This episode's a great jab at modern parents who let their kids get away with anything. Number 11, Hank versus video game addiction. Hank is not one for technology. This is demonstrated routinely whenever he tries to use a computer. But when one of Bobby's student teachers for his gaming class makes a game centered around propane with Hank as a character, that all changes.
Well, that figures. Those two idiots spelled it wrong.
Essentially a parody of the Grand Theft Auto series, Hank finds himself hopelessly addicted and wasting all of his time, leaving us with the message that it's important to monitor the amount of time we spend playing video games or with other time-consuming technologies.
Feels good to blink.
Number 10, Hank versus the comedian. When Hank is forced to pick a traffic school to attend in order to lower his insurance rates, he accidentally chooses Defensive Driving School, a comedy-themed class taught by comedian Budasek, voiced by Chris Rock.
White people be driving like this.
And watching Hank get uncomfortable with racial humor, of course, is hilarious.
Would you look at all the white people standing around? Ain't got no butt.
But when Bobby starts emulating Budisek's comedy, innocently unaware of the comedy's racial connotations, it leads him to getting his source material from a white nationalist website, leaving Hank and his new friend Budisek to save the day when he brings the material on stage.
We got a thing called freedom of speech. And a man on this stage can say any dumb-ass thing he wants.
Number 9. Hank vs. Y2K. If you're younger, there's a solid chance you may not even know what Y2K was. Back at the turn of the millennium, there was actually tons of people terrified that the world would essentially shut down on New Year's 2000. This was because they thought computer software wouldn't be able to accurately go from 1999 to 2000 because they used a 2-digit system.
I tell you what, man, them Y2K, man, them mainframes gonna come crashing down on that grid, man. They look like a damn apocalypse now, man, and I'm the horror.
Obviously, this was a giant hoax, but it was actually a real fear. In the episode Helenium, Hank buys into the doomsday theory and begins hoarding toilet paper and consumables. And although Y2K isn't relevant to anyone anymore, the conspiracy theory mentality is always something that will be around, and it was hilarious to watch the usual common sense Hank Hill embrace it. Number 8. Hank versus the video store bureaucracy. The episode Hank's Dirty Laundry is another episode that explores Hank's hatred for bureaucracy, this time at the video store. When he's accused of renting pornography due to a computer error at the store, he sets out to clear his name. However, every step he takes in the process of clearing his name only digs him deeper and deeper, creating a hilarious metaphor for corruption. Number 7. Hank versus Hippies. When Hank takes Bobby camping in the hopes of teaching him the importance of self-reliance, he's horrified to see that the campgrounds have been completely taken over by hippies, a group that King of the Hill has taken jabs at several times.
Welcome home, friend.
Bobby ultimately gets enticed by them when offered food, but soon learns that their lifestyle of taking whatever they want without earning it is wrong, and that his dad's value of responsibility and hard work is the way to go.
Hey, can you give me some money?
No.
Fascist.
And of course, Hank dealing with the free-spirited hippies is hilarious in and of itself. Number 6. Hank versus George W. Bush's handshake. Desperate to teach Luann the importance of democracy, Hank does his best to convince her to vote in the upcoming election. And although she decides to vote for a communist because she likes his tie, the bigger issue is what happens when Hank gets the opportunity to meet George W. Bush.
His handshake. It's limp.
It turns out that his handshake is limp, and Hank begins to reevaluate everything about not only his candidate, but also democracy in general. Of course, he comes to his senses by the end of the episode, but we're left with the message that no candidate is perfect, but still, voting matters, even if your candidate has a limp handshake. Number 5. Hank versus the boy band. The boy band era was an obvious choice for something to unleash upon Hank Hill. While policing the music that Bobby is embracing, Hank finally thinks he found an acceptable band for his son to listen to. A band called Fourscore.
It's not the Four Scores, Dad. It's Fourscore!
However, he only listens to a brief moment of it before making this determination. Upon bringing Bobby and his friends to a concert, Hank is horrified to see the seemingly good, family-friendly band break out with more sinister lyrics.
Well, this sure is some good old-fashioned music.
Which, of course, rubs off on Bobby.
We're dancing!
Number 4. Hank versus racism accusations. In the episode Racist Dog, Hank's dog Ladybird attacks a repairman that Hank has hired who happens to be black, voiced by Bernie Mac.
I know she's not prejudiced. She's racist.
Resulting in accusations of racism towards Ladybird and subsequently Hank, who others claim must have influenced his dog.
A man should not be judged by the color of his skin, but by the actions of his heart.
Hank's employees and even Peggy begin to believe the idea to be true until Hank hires another repairman who happens to be white. Ladybird responds the same way, proving that Hank's problem isn't with people of different races, but in fact, repairmen. In many ways, this episode explores the importance of giving someone the benefit of the doubt and the danger of jumping to conclusions with accusations of bigotry. Number 3. Hank versus Witchcraft. One of the greatest characters that comes into conflict with Hank is Ward, played by David Cross.
Resplendent!
In the episode The Witches of Arlen, Hank tries to encourage Bobby to find a new hobby. Of course, Bobby finds himself a deck of tarot cards and begins hanging around with Ward and his coven of weirdos.
Does this look dumb? Huzzah!
Don't make me come over there!
When Ward convinces Bobby to drink dog blood for a sacrifice, Hank must find Bobby and stop it from happening. What's great about this episode is that instead of taking the safe route of creating a message that says it's always okay to be different, Hank tells Bobby the cold, honest truth that his new friends are total weirdos, for his own good. And Bobby takes his dad's advice.
I have powers! Terrible powers!
And with all that said, Ward is one of the funniest one-episode characters on King of the Hill. Number 2, Hank versus the Pimp. A lot of episodes of King of the Hill have comedy that stems from having straight and narrow Hank stumble into some ridiculous situation. But one of the greatest examples of this was when he unknowingly befriended a prostitute and started being perceived as her pimp.
You mess with her, you mess with me. Now hand over the money.
In the episode Oh Yeah, she gives him a pimp hat and he begins driving his father's old Cadillac. Of course, people start getting the wrong idea, and when her former pimp, Alabaster Jones, played by Snoop Dogg, shows up to confront him, Hank realizes that he's unknowingly made himself into Arlen's pimp.
I am the Mac Daddy of Heimlich County. I play it straight up, yo.
Hank ultimately gets rid of Alabaster Jones with a new understanding of the fact that pimping ain't easy.
From now on, the only woman I'm pimping is Sweet Lady Propane. And I'm tricking her out all over this town.
And finally, number 1, Hank versus the anti-Halloween evangelical. The season 2 episode Halloween is often considered one of the best episodes of the series. One of the great things about it is that it's one of the episodes in which Hank doesn't represent the traditional stick in the mud. And of course, we say that with love for Hank. Usually, Hank is the voice of reason that takes issue with the fun new trend that Bobby, Dale, Bill, Boomhauer, Cotton, or even Peggy has embraced. Usually, by the end of the episode, Hank turns out to be right, but of course, everyone quickly forgets and goes back to thinking that Hank is a straight-laced stick in the mud. In Halloween, Hank goes head-to-head with a Bible study group leader named Junie Harper, who claims that Halloween is a satanic holiday and gets Hank's haunted house canceled.
And vandalism isn't cool.
Bobby, that attitude is a little immature.
Hank takes Bobby to go egg and TP her house, and we actually see Hank in a completely different light.
You're a regular Halloween hellraiser, just like your old man.
Eventually, the city council passes a curfew on Halloween. When Bobby starts to think that he did wrong, Hank is left with no other choice than to take to the streets in a devil outfit, encouraging everyone in the neighborhood to defy the curfew and go trick-or-treating.
You could go to jail.
I knew the risks when I put on the uniform.
Definitely one of the most triumphant endings.
Trick or treat! Trick or treat! Trick or treat!
And that's our list of the top 20 cultural battles that Hank Hill has fought that we think are still relevant today. Did we miss any cultural battles from King of the Hill that you think are still important? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, but most importantly, stay wicked.